It's Thursday, December 18th, 2014. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. After 50 years of severed ties, U.S. President Barack Obama says he will restore diplomatic and financial relations with communist Cuba. The Palestinians submit a softened draft resolution to the UN Security Council, setting timetables for negotiations and Israeli withdrawal from the occupied West Bank. And later on the show, once a dead man walking, now an action hero. A closer look at Sean Penn's new surprising film. Good morning, I'm Yael Levi. We begin with the historic news from the Americas, where yesterday evening, U.S. President Barack Obama announced plans to restore ties with communist Cuba 50 years after they were severed, declaring the end of what he called a rigid policy of isolation, which he characterized as ineffective. Obama announced that the U.S. would open an embassy in Havana and relax restriction on commerce and travel, though he noted that a full lifting of the trade embargo required congressional approval. That said, in a deal negotiated during 18 months of secret talks hosted largely by Canada and encouraged by Pope Francis, who hosted a final meeting at the Vatican, Mr. Obama and President Raul Castro of Cuba agreed in a telephone call to put aside decades of hostility to find a new relationship between the United States and the island nation just 90 miles off the American coast. The sharp policy shift was accompanied by mutual release of prisoners accused of spying, including Jewish-American contractor Alan Gross, as well as a Cuban national in prison for 20 years. With us in studio is former Israeli consul to New York, Coletta Vital. Ambassador Vital, good morning to you. And Channel 2's senior foreign affairs correspondent, Arad Neal, good morning to you. Very exciting news this morning. I'm actually saying this with a smile. And before we begin, let's take a look at what President Obama and Raul Castro had to say yesterday with this historic news breaking.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years, we will end an outdated approach that for decades has failed to advance our interests, and instead, we will begin to normalize relations between our two countries. Through these changes, we intend to create more opportunities for the American and Cuban people and begin a new chapter among the nations of the Americas. The United States has supported democracy and human rights in Cuba through these 5 decades. We've done so primarily through policies that aim to isolate the island, preventing the most basic travel and commerce that Americans can enjoy anyplace else. And though this policy has been rooted in the best of intentions, no other nation joins us in imposing these sanctions, and it has had little effect beyond providing the Cuban government with a rationale for restrictions on its people.
Resulting from dialogue at the highest level, which included a telephone conversation that I held yesterday with President Barack Obama, we have been able to advance in the resolution of some topics of mutual interest. This decision by President Obama deserves respect and recognition from our people. We have agreed on the re-establishment of diplomatic relations. This does not mean that the principal issues has been resolved. The economic, commercial, and financial blockade that provoked enormous human and economic suffering on our country should end.
We're also joined from California, the United States, by our one and only Tony Grant. Tony, good morning to you.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning. I'm sure the American media is dealing predominantly with the news this morning, of actually the news of the true end to one of the relics of the Cold War, correct?
Right. I mean, you get some sort of these breath-catching headlines from the New York Times, for example, talking about sort of this sudden sea change in relations between the United States and Cuba, and sort of the last drama of the Cold War falling away. Of course, it's rapidly becoming a political issue as well, because of sort of the reaction, the kind of mixed reaction that people have had to this news from Miami to Washington D.C. A lot of mixed messages, you might say.
I mean, in Miami, we've seen some photos of demonstrations against President Obama about negotiating with terrorists. Are people really still feeling that strongly against Cuba in this day and age?
Well, it seems that there's like in Miami, I think in the area of Little Havana and Miami as a whole is something upwards of a million sort of Cuban Americans, if you will, people who have Cuba in their blood, so to speak. And a lot of them think that Obama has kind of perhaps even inadvertently rewarded what some people consider to be kind of an authoritarian regime in Cuba. And it's not the way that they would have liked to have seen this change affected. It may not be the majority American opinion. In fact, it seems to not be the majority American opinion. But for those who are geographically the closest to Cuba, there does seem to be a bit of a disappointment, might be even an understatement.
Putting it mildly. Stay with us. Joining us on the phone also from Cuba, Havana, is Havana Times writer Isabel Diaz-Torres. Isabel, good morning to you.
Yes, good morning, Bob. It's night right now here in Cuba, you know?
No, I do know. So good night to you. Celebrations in Cuba? How are people taking the news?
Well, in fact, despite the excitement shown by the Cuba television, the truth is that the people in the street seem to be not very well informed about the news, you know? I made a tour around some central places and streets, and I found mostly silence between my people here in Havana.
Nobody's celebrating. We want to go see Disney World. Interesting. When this news came out yesterday, though, what were the reactions?
You asked me about the reaction?
Yes, the reactions.
Yes, well, as I'm telling you, there's a lot of information on the television of the state here, but we cannot see that kind of information in the people on the street. Right now, we saw some demonstrations at the Havana University showing how pleased they feel about the release of the 3 agents that come from the U.S. to Cuba. And, of course, these changes in the policies between the two governments. But in fact, I asked 2 people on the street, and I found no response to that. They were not aware of what was happening.
Interesting.
Because the news were released at noon.
No, very late at night. Isabel, thank you so much for being with us. Moving to the studio now, Coletta Vital and Aradni. First, you know what, Coletta, I'll start with you. It seems like this was a long time coming in many, 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 many ways. A decision as such by President Obama. What do you think is behind that?
I think, first of all, it's an intelligent and a realistic and a courageous decision. And I think that somehow Obama, having done a lot of things unsuccessfully during his 2 terms of services as President of the United States, has finally found one subject on which he can leave an impact. And probably that will be his legacy. This is what he will be remembered by. I think that probably when I speak about a realistic policy, I think that they must have realized after 50 years that nothing will change, that they don't have the power to change the regime in Cuba, that they don't want to interfere in that regime anymore, and that finally he's got to do something to end that period of isolation of Cuba and perhaps the poverty of the people there.
Yeah, but which can only help. And it leads me, Aradni, senior foreign correspondent for Channel 2, to the question of, other than the fact that this is, an interesting and great moment in history, it kind of closes the Cold War as we know it. Does it mean anything, really?
Yes, I think.
Okay, the legacy bit I get.
Allow me to be a bit romantic in such a day, and I think it does mean. It means that Obama, Ms. Avital was talking about his legacy. Right. Obama is working on his legacy under the current circumstances. He lost midterm elections. Right. He does not have a political backing anymore. He can't deal with petty politics, and believe me, Washington is soaked with petty politics.
The mildest understatement of the year.
So he went back to square one, opened his campaign issues, and it was there. He was talking about normalizing the ties with Cuba, shutting down Guantanamo Bay camp, etc. So he went to square one, and he sees what he can do, and he takes the first option, and it was a good option because it was very somber and courageous move by the President of the United States, who does not have a political backing in Congress at the moment, to stand in front of the American people saying we were wrong for 50 years. You cannot do again and the same thing again and again and expect different results. It was very courageous, and mind you, Yael, this is not the way a lame duck is walking.
That's right.
So he is here to prove that he is not a lame duck, and we are and you know, these the last term, the last 2 years of his in office are just beginning. So
that's right.
We'll wait and see.
No, in the last 2 years, no, Colette, the question to you, the last 2 years, which clearly he has a Senate and a Congress that are predominantly Republican.
Yeah, but there are certain decisions which he can take.
But he's been dubbed the executive decision maker in a way that he's done so more than many other presidents. I'm wondering out loud if this is the type of decision that the Republicans are going to try and block just because this is a legacy move.
Probably.
It is a legacy move with lots of national interest. So what's wrong?
And when it comes to national interest, do we still have Tony Grant still with us via Skype from California? I'm wondering out loud, first of all, this thing was negotiated for 18 months.
Nobody knew.
And nobody knew. And as we're sitting here in the Middle East, I have to say, very commendable. You know?
that was because the Jewish part was in prison in Havana.
In Havana, yes, Tony. Tony,
I think that Pope Francis and the Canadians knew. Obviously, they each had instrumental roles in helping to precipitate this development, as is being widely reported. In terms of the legacy, of course, there's been some coverage, of course, about the legacy that Obama is very conscious of. Again, though, it's important to take it into context that Cuba is very close to the United States, and to play devil's advocate for a moment, you could say that in terms of diplomatic achievements or lack thereof that Obama has had, Cuba is kind of low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's not the most difficult dilemma to attempt to resolve, and I would say on the Republican side, you have Marco Rubio, who is with a very high-ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who was already openly saying that this decision, which is being hailed by some as very brave and very sort of status quo changing, is going to, and I quote, cause tyrants from Caracas to Tehran to Pyongyang to see that they can take advantage of President Obama's naivete during his final 2 years in office. And so this is one heck of a way to close out the year.
Another option, too.
The other option being what?
There's another option.
There's another option that this will help the regime soften up in Cuba, too.
Yeah. That this is going to be what? Yeah, and Colette, you were saying?
I'm saying that this may bring changes inside Cuba as well. I mean, you don't have to see that as a unilateral move only. I think that Cuba also, inside Cuba, probably things will start changing. Certainly when there will be a little bit more prosperity and when people will have another type of horizon and they will be able to travel to the United States, I think that also may bring about changes inside Cuba.
No, inside Cuba, undoubtedly so, which, makes me wonder, Aradnia, as you said, I mean, I think we all are in agreement that this is a legacy move. It's also, I personally feel like I can say
not only legacy move. Actually, Obama trailed the U.S. public opinion here because the U.S. public opinion for years now is for normalization with Cuba. They're not backing this boycott anymore. It's the business community. It's the social aspirations of certain communities. They're not happy with this kind of continuous boycott. It's the culture. Yes, there are some Cuban exiles with their own agenda who opposed it, and the Republicans who are constantly detached from public opinion, even though that on local grounds they win the elections. But we'll wait and see what will happen in 2 years. And, maybe last and not least, a point here, let me remind us all that Barack Hussein Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize. So eventually he's justifying it, so it's about time. But there's one more thing I'd like to stress here, with your permission. Obama was acting here against the Congress. He doesn't have the backing of the congressional approval here. And, maybe somebody in Jerusalem has to take this into account too, because Now he's doing whatever he believes in with all his executive power, without the congressional power. And, maybe, we have one eye now, even in this conversation here in the studio, on the UN Security Council. So maybe, there will be some consequences there.
Yeah.
So maybe someone has to check the cards again and see how to play.
And maybe Kerry will win the Nobel Peace Prize, as somebody suggested. Let us hope. John Kerry.
John Kerry may be the next one. Colette Vital, do you agree that, just as we wrap this up, that this is actually a wink towards the UN Security Council, or actually kind of a show of power? If I can do this here, I can do this in other places? It
is a show of power. No doubt about it. We still don't know what will happen at the Security Council. There are signals. I'm sure that what Mr. Netanyahu had to hear in Rome was not very pleasant to his ears.
Right.
And I think that altogether we are facing a political tsunami around Europe.
Decisions. No, indeed, which we're going to move on to very shortly. Tony Grant from California, thank you for being with us. The two of you are locked with me in the studio. Straight back to the point, back in regional news, Israel suffered back-to-back diplomatic setbacks in Europe yesterday as Palestinians headed to the United Nations to try to set a deadline for an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank. Late last night, Jordan submitted on the PA's behalf a draft resolution calling for a 12-month deadline for wrapping up negotiations on a final settlement and an end to Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories by 2017. In Geneva, the international community delivered another stinging rebuke to Israel's settlement construction in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, saying the practice violates Israel's responsibilities as an occupying power. And to boot, the European Union's second highest court yesterday has ordered the removal of the Islamist group Hamas from a terrorist blacklist, citing procedural problems with the listing. It added, however, that the group's assets should remain frozen for 3 months pending an almost certain appeal. First, we'll go live to Jerusalem to speak with the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Emmanuel Nachshon. Emmanuel Nachshon, good morning to you. Reactions in the Foreign Ministry this morning to this resolution. Good morning. The resolution, the Palestinian resolution, handed in by Jordan to the United Nations Security Council. What will be the reaction of Israel? What will be the reaction of the Foreign Ministry?
Well, for the moment, as you know, the Palestinians have presented a motion to the Security Council.
Yes.
The Palestinians have
Yes, the Palestinians have submitted. No, definitely, they've submitted
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, the Palestinians have presented or submitted a motion to the Security Council, but it is not clear when this motion will be debated and discussed in the Security Council. So I would say that this is what we have on the Palestinian side, and now we are expecting a reaction of the international community and the United States. It is obvious from an Israeli perspective that the motion, as far as we know its contents, is not acceptable to the Israeli side, because it is a motion which is trying to impose a solution instead of negotiating. And this has been the Palestinian logic, the Palestinian diplomatic logic now for quite some time. They try to impose on us a solution instead of negotiating with us. And this is unacceptable. And I'm quite confident that the United States will veto such a resolution in case it receives enough support in the Security Council. And I'm not even sure that the Palestinians will be able to receive the 9 votes which they need in order to pass such a resolution. So, of course, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that I think that we can confront and manage.
Well, when you say confront and manage, how do you propose that the Foreign Ministry confronts and manages it? Also, the resolution actually calls for negotiations within a year. It's a softened, watered-down version. But when you say, the Israeli ministry is going to manage it, how is it going to manage it?
Well, I think that we are going to demonstrate, and this is the most important point, we are going to demonstrate that this resolution and the whole Palestinian strategy, which is unfortunately supported also by European countries, is based on a false logic, because it tries to create a situation with a very clear time frame, and if the time frame is not adhered to, then the Palestinians will immediately obtain a recognition as a country by the international community. And we are going to show that, in fact, the whole purpose of what the Palestinians are trying to do is to fail with the negotiations, to try to gain time, and then to obtain through international pressure what they cannot obtain through negotiations. And obviously this is something that Israel cannot accept, and I think that this is something that the international community cannot accept either.
Okay, Emmanuel Nachshon, do stay with us. Thank you. We're joined in studio also by I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev. Good morning to you. Still with us, Ambassador Avital, and Arad Nir, Channel 2 Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent. Tal, first of all, we've expected it. It was pulled back, forth. What is the reaction within the government?
Well, the government is still waking up, but the first reaction already this morning from one of Netanyahu's closest ministers, Yuval Steinitz, who does say that this is a declaration of war from the Palestinian Authority's side. It's not as it's any big surprise, but we are in election time, so every diplomatic move gets such more meaning in this context. And the big question is, we'll wait to see, is how will Netanyahu himself react, and will he announce any punitive measures? I remind that after November 2012, when the Palestinians did go to the General Assembly, then there was a series of punitive measures from the Israeli side, cutting off relations, cutting off any negotiations. At the moment, you know, the current relationship are so slim that there's not much left to cut, but Netanyahu could... There is a risk of Netanyahu actually escalating or the situation deteriorating if Netanyahu succumbs to right-wing pressure at this moment to have a proper Zionist response, maybe by announcing some settlement expansion or some settlement construction. So this could definitely turn into a wide-scale diplomatic crisis. But I think that I hope that Netanyahu will be able to control this. He isn't torn between two directions. On the one hand, the international community. On the other hand, right-wing constituents who are pressuring him very much to continue with settlement expansion.
Yeah, election capital. Before we move this back to the studio on the diplomatic international level, also joined on the phone by Dimitri Diliani, member of the Fatah Revolutionary Council in East Jerusalem. Dimitri, good morning to you. Points raised here, and you've heard also Emmanuel Nachshon from the Foreign Ministry. Points raised here that actually this type of a move not only will not be passed by the 9 members of the new UN Security Council, but at this stage, as you've heard our diplomatic correspondent say, can also actually play its political capital into the hands of Prime Minister Netanyahu in this election campaign, the Israeli election campaign.
Well, I think Netanyahu will use it, but the Israeli public has a responsibility to know, well, first of all, that the state of Palestine is a fact. Two, that they got to this diplomatic position due to the failures of the right-wing government of Israel in reaching any solution through peace process. It shows that also the Palestinians, us, we are keen on achieving our state through negotiations. That's why there is a 1-year negotiation period to reach a peace deal. And it's up to the Israeli public to make the decision whether they will be following a leader like Netanyahu, who is driving them off a cliff, or they will choose different leadership that would take him to safety under these current circumstances. At any rate, whatever Netanyahu has been doing all throughout his term, he's been playing public campaigns, using cliches, nothing on the ground. Even economically, he's not achieving anything. Politically, he's not achieving anything. So why would any sane person in the world, other than Sarah, would vote for Netanyahu? I really trust that his kids wouldn't vote for him because they look like smart kids.
Dimitri, do stay with us on the phone. Arad Nir, I want to ask you, will the Americans veto this?
I can't tell you.
Yeah, I think that's the main question.
That is the main question. It's what I can tell you, that it is not obvious that they will veto this move. This move is not finalized yet. It will be deliberated. It's not up for a vote yet. It is in blueprint, but still open for negotiations. So it seems like a more of a temporary move by those who handed it in rather than the final act. But the American sword is up there. We don't know how they will behave. We did not hear much of Netanyahu and Kerry's meeting in Rome this week, as Ambassador Avital mentioned earlier in the discussion. And Netanyahu probably did not hear the best of things over there. And mind you, Netanyahu is campaigning now. He's not offering any hope for the Palestinian side. And Mr. Nachshon from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is doing his job, but saying that this will end up all option for negotiations. Excuse me. What negotiations? When were the last negotiations? So this is a manner of speak, this is a manner of propaganda, hasbara, the Israelis like to call it, but there's nothing to explain here. There are no negotiations, the Palestinians have got no other options. I think that the signs from Europe are pointing to the very same way. And we are in an election period now. Maybe it is time for the international community not to hold back before election, worrying not to be shown as interfering in the election campaign, but stating to the Israeli electorate the price of the vote. So they will know what are the options that are ahead of them, what will happen after election.
And I'm wondering, as I'm looking at the Americans, actually, Colette, I'd like to start with you, but if we see the American president doing such a fundamental historic move late last night of normalizing relations with Cuba, as you said before, that he's going for his 2 years of legacy, and he shows, I can do what I want. Do we think that maybe not vetoing this is a watered-down, Tal, correct me, this is a watered-down resolution in many ways?
Well, the Palestinians,
Well, first of all, let me say one thing, just listening to my former colleague, Nachshon. I think the word, the expression that one has to understand all the time is that this government deals with conflict, not resolution, but with conflict management. And all the time, all they're thinking about is, we can manage. Well, obviously, we can't manage anymore. And obviously, I think I will agree to every word that Arad Nir has said. The Israeli public has to be able to face the options, has to be able to understand, and it can also play the other way around, not necessarily into Netanyahu's hands. It can also play into the hands of those who say, look, Israel is being isolated day after day. Perhaps we've got to change our policy. Perhaps we've got to come with our own initiatives for once. And you know what? I think that if Israel, instead of saying we'll manage, would be the first one to say, okay, we recognize. Fine, negotiations for a year, fine, we recognize. We recognize the Palestinian state. We've already said that would be a game change.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, but in the 30 seconds we have left, Tal, that's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I think that it would be wishful thinking for the international community and for the left wing to think that these actually might expose and reveal to the Israeli public what international isolation Netanyahu is leading to. I think in the fact it only convinces the convinced already and just radicalize the existing ideas or positions of the Israeli public.
We don't have time, but
No, 2 seconds. We're going to the news. And moving to the news. Stay back.
Yeah.
Stay with us. Good morning. I-24 News Morning Edition, the place you should be on this December 18th, because it's the only place to say hello and good morning to Ruthie Sinai, I-24 News senior news editor, who's here. Good morning. Replacing Tony, who's on his way to Cuba.
Cuba? Is that where you have him today?
No, everyone today is Cuba. Where in the world is Tony Grant? But Ruthie's here with the news you missed while scanning the headlines, and there was quite a lot of it.
Yes, there was. Okay, we are going to the Independent this morning, which reports about this horrible Pakistani, the aftermath of this massacre in Pakistan. The country is still, obviously hasn't even started finishing burying 148 people. They just found the body of the principal of the school in the debris of the, the aftermath.
And of the 143, I think the thing that, struck me so terribly about the story is that it's approximately 100 children.
Yeah.
Children, some of them, most of them, a lot of them under the age of 12.
Totally.
And
just lined up and shot, massacred. It's really hard to fathom.
And I think the million-dollar question here when we're looking at the story is because the Taliban does have support in Pakistan, and after an act as such...
but not this time. Not this time. I think they crossed the line. First of all, a couple of things have happened. First of all, they have reinstated the death penalty. There was a moratorium on death penalty in Pakistan. It has been since 2008. death penalty reinstated for terrorists, and Sharif, the Pakistani Prime Minister, has gone to Afghanistan for a meeting with his Afghani counterpart to discuss, how to pursue these people across borders. It kind of reminded me a bit of,
It's a little bit American.
Yeah, no, and a little bit Israeli. We're gonna get the terrorists all over the world.
Yeah. But it's I think a crime, terror so gruesome that one cannot even begin to fathom, and hopefully that'll change in ways of sentiments towards the Taliban in that region.
It's beyond the pale. I think it's uniting people in Pakistan. Sad to say.
Sad to say. Yes. Moving on.
Okay. We may not remember because it's been so crazy the last few days, but there was another terror attack in Australia.
Can we call it a terror attack?
Well, okay, so here's the question. It's a good question. Although I think, any sort of, gunman standing over hostages is some sort of,
he didn't come to rob a bank. I think, you start with this, and I know where both of us are heading with this.
Okay, yes. So this gentleman, Manharon Muniz, apparently the Iranians had asked Australia to extradite him for all sorts of fraud-related offenses in Iran before, 20 years ago or some, before he fled Iran for Australia. They provided apparently, enough evidence that this guy was, not the salt of the earth. The Australians, this is 20/20 hindsight, but the Australians refused to extradite him.
Refused to extradite. This is a man connected and linked to the death and the murder of his wife, sending death threats, letters to families of soldiers in Afghanistan and roaming the streets.
But you see, that's exactly the thing, because people think that he's roaming the streets. He's just another nutcase.
And that's important. Another discussion that we'll probably have off camera is how the world immediately ISIS inspired it. Yeah. And that's how we led our coverage. But moving on. Yes.
Okay. All right. New York Times has this great story. We're going to Mars. We're going to do the morning edition from Mars.
Finally.
Yeah. They found life. They found, they haven't found life. They found, they found something that may hint that there's life. Methane gas.
I was about to say, is it water? Okay.
No, it's methane gas. And basically methane gas doesn't last a whole lot of time. So and this is thought to be very recent, and so it means something is moving there. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it looks like.
Listen, I think that for both you and I, and possibly also our guests in the studio that will move to shortly in the next item, Mars is not such a bad option.
Absolutely, and there's no terror there.
But no terror there, and
Yeah. Okay, do we still have time? We've got the Washington Post.
Please.
So Putin doesn't have enough troubles as it is. Obama is going to sign into law more sanctions, just to kind of show him who's boss. I think Obama, for all his problems, is probably sitting there and feeling pretty.
I'm glad you mentioned this. I'm glad you mentioned because the ruble was crashing.
Right.
The Russian economy, and I think, as you said, I think the American administration is sitting in the White House going, ha ha ha.
Yeah, exactly.
The sanctions have worked. Is it the sanctions, though, or is it the world oil prices that are sinking?
It's the oil.
It's the oil, most likely. Right?
Absolutely.
But it's looking good. And for the American administration.
Who cares? Bottom line is they're crashing.
They're crashing.
No, we shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's hardship for a lot of Russians, and of course it has reverberations.
No, completely. I think the story that we'll definitely be looking at for the next few weeks, if not months, to say the least.
They seem to have stopped the plunge, but that's about it.
Yes. What else?
Okay, another horror: Islamic State, the Iraqi Ministry of Human Rights. There is such a thing, has reported that 150 women were slaughtered by Islamic State for refusing to marry militants. Some of them were pregnant, apparently. Yet another, in the
production,
in the endless horror.
The frightening thing of about ISIS, as we say every morning, I think when we bring stories about the Islamic State, ISIS, whichever way you want to call them, is essentially the fact that they were missed for so long, so to speak, by Western coalition forces, and how fastly that they've risen. Ruthie, you're staying with us as we're moving on to the next item, but in this press review, as we said, Ruthie and I are with us every day this week as Tony is on assignment in Cuba. We are moving on to another day that we're actually to another topic that's being marked today, and that is today's International Migrants Day, when the world acknowledges the plight of 232 million migrant people around the world. This year was a bad one for migrants, and reports showing that the number of people dying on dangerous journeys in the hope of finding better lives reached a record 5,000 migrants in 2014. Here in Israel, the number of migrants has dropped dramatically since the government constructed a fence along the Egyptian border and put in place a series of other harsh measures. Those who are here, mostly asylum seekers from Sudan and Eritrea, are barred from working and mostly live in squalor in the slums of Tel Aviv. To further discuss this, we're joined in studio by the Legal Department Director for Hotline for Refugees and Migrants, Advocate Asaf Weitzen. Very glad you're here with us. Morning. Amazing work that you're doing. And by Congolese asylum seeker and community activist Oscar Olivier. Oscar, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Ruthie Sinai still with us in studio. Let's take a look at Olivier's stories also, at Ron Friedman's report about Olivier as we mark today's Migrants' Day.
The influx of tens of thousands of illegal migrants into Israel in recent years has led some to dub the neighborhoods of South Tel Aviv Little Africa. The introduction of a large and impoverished population into an already weak social fabric was a recipe for disaster, and clashes between residents and asylum seekers were quick to follow. But not everybody gave in to the fear and frustration.
It was then worse because now when asylum seekers come in, even if it's not perfect, but you have a couple of NGOs trying to help here and there. When I came in, there was nothing.
Oscar Olivier came to Israel 20 years ago from war-torn Congo and has lived in the southern neighborhood ever since.
This is actually one of the reasons me too I'm trying to reach out and also do something for others because I couldn't survive by my own.
Together with other migrant activists and local Israelis, he formed Power to the Community, an organization aimed at promoting cooperation in an effort to improve conditions.
This place used to be the heart of the town of Tel Aviv. Now, most Israelis feel like for them to come here, they need a visa and passport, while we're still in Israel. Why? Because somebody just decided to neglect this neighborhood. We, as the residents of the South Tel Aviv, we decided to do something for the neighborhood. We wanted to have this feeling of security, personal security in the South Tel Aviv.
Twice a week, Oscar and his partners take to the streets and talk with local residents and merchants to see how they can help them.
נראה לך, עכשיו זה טוב או לא טוב?
לא טוב.
למה לא טוב?
כבר אין אנשים.
אין קליינטים?
אין לי קליינטים, אין אנשים.
Everyone is trying to leave the neighborhood going away. But it's not perfect there. If you reach there, you'll quickly realize that their problems are there as well. You might leave that elsewhere. There's no place which is perfect.
Oscar Olivier, that's you in the piece from actually a year ago that Ron Friedman, our editor, did about you. This is a year ago. You've been here for 20 years. Do you think the situation has gotten better?
Unfortunately not. The situation is like getting worse because some policy makers, when they refer to asylum seekers or to the migrant workers, usually the word used is wave. We have a wave of asylum seekers. We have a wave of migrant workers. And these words usually traumatize the local population, while we know that the huge majority of migrant workers are people who are fair people, decent people. They work, they pay taxes, and they contribute in some way to the local economy. And if they could be given the opportunity to do better, they can be a strong and a population which might really be a tool to the local population, to the country of host. But usually we face the hostility of policymakers who make things hard for the migrant workers, and they are usually denied the minimum basic right. Also the fact that most migrant workers do not know the local law. They do not know anything, so it makes it hard for them to turn to the NGOs to ask for help.
Even to know what to ask for, step in, and that's where people like where Advocate Asaf Weitzen actually comes in. You spent the whole night last night working on the petition, right? Because you're one of the advocates that actually deal very strongly with them, the plight of the, call them foreign workers, asylum seekers. That's exactly one of the main problems in this country, I believe. But when it comes to a big constructed building where everybody was put in, what is the petition you worked on, and what's going on with Cholot? And that's actually the big prison that many asylum seekers find themselves in this country.
So yes, Israel decided that asylum seekers that cannot be sent back to their countries of origin, mainly from Eritrea and Sudan, are not asylum seekers, are not refugees, and are not even working migrants. They are infiltrators. And they're threatening the Jewish character of the state, they're threatening the economy of the state. We're talking about 48,000 people. Just 48,000 people that are asking asylum in Israel accept the fact that they cannot be returned to their countries of origin because of danger to their health and to their life. So what Israel is doing to them, instead of giving them rights, checking their asylum requests and so on, Israel built one of the largest facilities in the world. It's called Cholot. It's in the desert. They can hold 3,300 people there, and they want to increase the capacity. Prison. And it's an open prison. Why it's open? Because they can go out, make a round in front of a small hill and come back to the so-called open prison. And the Supreme Court canceled the amendment that allowed this detention facility and said that those are human beings and they have rights. They have rights to make a family, to make a life. And what the Knesset, the parliament, did with it, left about the Supreme Court, said that they don't have any rights, and they built another law, another amendment that will keep Cholot as it is. And we will fight this again.
It's the third time, right? I mean, the Supreme Court has struck down the law twice against this detention facility. And so the Knesset keeps coming back and saying, what's actually pushed by the government, keeps going, okay, so we'll reduce it. Initially, they allowed detention for 3 years.
Exactly.
Then they allowed detention then the law was amended to allow detention for 2 years. And now
it's a bit, you're very right, but the thing is that at first there was detention for 3 years. We went to the Supreme Court with a constitutional petition. The Supreme Court said, no, you cannot detain people without a trial just because they are migrants and asylum seekers. So what the Knesset did is made instead of 3 years, 1 year, and the open detention facility for an unlimited period of time, which can last 3 years or more. So then we again went to the Supreme Court, again said this is not constitutional and not legal. Again, the Supreme Court accepted the petition. And what the Knesset did, instead of realizing that something should be done differently, is just making the same thing in a different...
In a different version.
In a different version, exactly.
And basically saying, it's almost childish. If it weren't so sad, it's almost childish. You say, okay, you won't give us 3 years, we'll give us, so we'll give you 1 year. We won't give them 1 year. And the other thing that's important to understand is that this facility is not in the middle of Tel Aviv.
It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So the fact that it's open doesn't really mean much because people, until they get out, it's in the middle of the desert, more or less.
I mean, still a vast majority are in Tel Aviv, Oscar, and I think, one of the problems you also face is from within the community of residents in Israel. What would you say to, I think, is it up to the country? Is it up to, if you're getting no rights at this stage in life as a migrant? You've been here for 20 years, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the issue in South Tel Aviv is that weak population have been brought into the country, and put on the shoulders of another weak population. Right. The huge majority of asylum seekers and migrant workers are in South Tel Aviv, and they've been there, mainly the asylum seekers, they've been there, brought there by the government. They were put in buses, and the bus driver was told, you drive straight to Levinsky Park in South Tel Aviv, and they were brought there. So this way, if asylum seekers were spread all over the country, we would have come up with a proportion of, Israel is a country of 6 million people. If we spread fairly the 50,000 asylum seekers, we would come up with 0.01 asylum seeker for 100 Israelis. You wouldn't even notice them. But today, if you go...
So it's even less.
Even less.
Today, if you go to South Tel Aviv, you have the impression that you are in Africa because you have the proportion of, for one Israeli, you have 3 asylum seekers.
An incredible valid point. I mean, sadly, I'm stopping because we have very little time left, but Asaf, I want to finish with your words. You said you're going to fight that petition. You're going to fight it, obviously.
We're fighting. We're going to win, I hope.
Thank you for being with us so much this morning. When we get back, something completely different, actually. We're looking at a documentary photography exhibition in Tel Aviv that all of you should take a look at. First, the news, though. Thank you for being with us. Well, Welcome back. It is still Thursday, December 18th, 2014. This is the morning edition on I-24 News, the place you should be. Last I checked, I'm still Yael Levi. Thank you for staying with us. And why should you be here? You ask yourselves. Because the next item is actually great. It's all about photojournalism. Photojournalism, a particular form of journalism that employs images in order to tell a news story that we all know. Now, in a world where every iPhone, yes, this one, can become a documenting tool, this definition is more relevant than ever. And in Israel, Local Testimony, a regional exhibition of photojournalism that runs concurrently with the annual World Press Photo Exhibition, that features international press photographers, happened this week. This annual exhibition features the best documentary and press photos from Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The exhibition represents a retrospective of the past year's events and images typifying a variety of categories, documenting moments of cultural, social, human significance together with media value. We are so very happy to be joined by one of the winners. One of them. Okay. Of the photography story category, Dan Chaimovic. Dan, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. And before we take a look at this exhibition and your fabulous look, let's take a look at a report of the exhibition itself, who was there and what was showing.
The best thing about this exhibition that it's in a public museum and many visitors come here and get exposed to subjects they usually don't see.
My series concentrates on the Israeli heat. Instead of, it doesn't have a subject, it has a narrative, and the narrative is the heat and many, many aspects of the heat. All these things that we kind of take as, as ordinary are not ordinary. And I always say, wow, this is crazy. And, you see people walking by, not looking at these crazy scenes that for me blow my mind time after time. Still, more than 20 years after I've lived here, it's still very much in my subconscious and in my conscious.
First of all, as we were looking at the pictures and all of us, holding our breath, you won in the story the category was story, documented photograph story.
It's a new category
in the exhibition.
Yeah.
But this is an annual exhibition that I think gives a great stage for local photographers. And what I found so amazing about the pictures that we've just seen is that, as opposed to people who come here, photographers who come from overseas. And usually you see the same image. It's the image of the conflict, it's the iconic image of the conflict. It's this different take that you guys bring in, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the fact that we live here and we know those places and we look at them in a local way,
right,
is different. And most of the photographers that comes here to Israel from abroad do usually the conflict, deals with the conflict.
That's one of the reasons they're sent in.
So,
that's one day.
Most of the photographers that works here in Israel and do photojournalism and do stories go deeper and into local stories, into issues that are not always on the headlines. And that's
always
what
on the international headlines. Yeah.
That's what interests me, usually social, with social background stories and things that are not on the headlines.
The story behind the story. If we can take a look at the picture that Dan, that won you that category, we have that picture, I'm wondering out loud if it's coming up. But one of them will be coming up in a second. When you say the social story, that you look at, that you look in deeper, the picture that was shown, this is it. This is the picture that was showcased.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Alex.
Tell me, what's the story behind it?
Well, the story is about people, first of all. It's about people that currently are homeless. They live in a tent camp in a very central place in Tel Aviv.
Who is Alex? He's one of the people who live in
Alex is one of the residents in this place. He lives there already about 2 years. He's a charming young man, really charming, very sensitive,
He's very normative. He's working from time to time, and he lives there in very hard conditions with a lot of others. And
most of them are former vets, or former veterans, or former soldiers, or former, or just homeless.
You can find everything there. You can find people from the age of 25 until the age of 65.
And it's barely covered with the thing that you said before, which is very true. It's barely covered in the headlines. It's barely covered in the news anymore. I know those tents. I know we pass by them every single day.
A lot of people cross by, even they on the jam, on the traffic jam, they stand on the light and they look at this place and they ask themselves, what is this place?
What is this place? And looking at this, and this one also another photograph of yours.
Yeah, this is Andre. He's one of the youngest residents there. He's there for almost 8 months, I think.
When you say youngest, how old? He's in his 20s.
But he's a different example because he chose in a way to be there, and this is what's interesting in this place because there are a lot of kind of stories, a lot of kind of people. It comes from a lot of backgrounds. Most of them are coming after financial collapse, and find themselves in this place. There are also Irena, she's an amazing woman. She's
I mean, what I find striking about it, she lives in that compound as well, in those tents.
On her own. She used to be engineer, constructor engineer. She worked even a few years in the municipality of Tel Aviv. And she's there for almost 2 years in the winter, all over a year.
And and the last one is, as we're looking at it right now, another resident of. Now you took your photograph subjects actually, and you chose to take a picture of them outside of the context of the compound.
That was part of the work that I did there. I started, and after a few months that I was photographing there, documenting the place, the people, and I get to know the people. I started thinking about doing a series of portraits, and then I was asking myself, how do I want to put them, to take the pictures?
Where would you take their picture? Yeah.
And I finally, one day I found a corner there with a black background, and I brought a small light, and I took few pictures of them.
Wow.
This was the beginning of the series, and then I realized that it's much more powerful to put them outside of the context
rather than inside the context.
Without the background of the poverty of the being homeless, and just to let the people who looks at them the opportunity to look at someone,
straight at them,
at the people as they are.
You know, it's an amazing work, and as we said, featured in local testimony, an exhibition going on right now.
Yeah, it started 2 days ago. It will last until the 24th of January. I think it's a very important exhibition, and it's a great platform for us, for photographers, especially for the young photographers who does an incredible job. And they are so talented, like Avishag Shar-Yashuv, like Oren Ziv, like Tali Meyer, who even got wounded this year. And they take a lot of risk in their work, and I think they deserve people to see their work.
No, rightfully so. Dan Chaimovich, very true words when it comes to a profession that I find very important, especially when it's shot by professionals and without filters, in many ways. Thank you for being with us. You're kind of locked here for the next item, which is the spiral viral that is the web review with Tala Heinrich today.
I love it, don't worry.
Yeah, because this is the real news.
I have special things
just
that
for
will fit your artistic self. Exactly.
Yes, go for it.
Let's start with Google. They published their annual list of searches for 2014, and of course this reflects us as a society.
As a society. I think I know which one.
You saw it?
Yeah, which one's the most searched one?
Let's Robin Williams.
Wow,
Robin Williams. He's the most searched person than any other person, event, or gadget This is pretty impressive. Yeah, in Canada, for example,
I
know that
the frightening thing is that he had to commit suicide for that to happen.
Yes.
I think that Robin Williams himself would have so much to say about the fact that a line like Robin Williams in the World Cup topped Google's ear and search
exactly.
review.
So it's Robin Williams, World Cup, and then Ebola. Then after, Malaysia Airlines, and then ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And within the people category, who are the most people, the people searched. So Jennifer Lawrence, she came in first, and I don't think it has to do with her acting skills.
I have a feeling it has something to do with pictures.
And also the second, Kim Kardashian came in second. Also no. And then the third female was Julie Gayet. I see you.
Yeah, you see my point. Yeah.
And Julie Gayet, I think
I have no social life.
She is Francois Hollande has social life. So exactly. So people wanted to see who is this woman
mystery woman
he was having an affair
stuff.
with.
Okay.
Yes. And then if you were wondering about the questions, sometimes we write the question how to or so the top trending what is question was what is Ebola? Of course, I can understand it. And then what is ALS?
I have to stop you for a second, and Dan Chaimovich will agree with me that I think one of the biggest things that caused the Ebola scare around the world is the fact that people Googled what is Ebola, or if you Google Ebola symptoms online, you immediately have Ebola. Yes.
And then what is ALS? That caused curiosity. And what is ISIS?
That I think is something that everybody in the world should know.
It's out there.
It's out there.
Exactly. And then the top trending how-to questions were so cute. The first one was how to vote, and the second was how to kiss. This is cute, right? You love it.
Yes, I do.
All right, let's
on the trick corner. How to vote and how to kiss. Was there any how to vote and kiss simultaneously? Okay.
That's a good idea. So let's move on to the next item. As I was sitting here, I think it was 2 days or 3 days ago, telling you about a 17-year-old teen who made allegedly $72 million from trading and from his share portfolio.
I'm very happy. I'm reading the headline. He was lying.
He was lying to the New York Magazine. I don't know about the reporter, but the New York Magazine, they published an apology on the website saying our fact-checking process was obviously inadequate. Well,
did he make any amount of money, or did he?
No, he was. So he was a part of this. His school. He's 17, right? He's still in high school. So he was a part of this club in which they do a simulator, online simulator, exactly.
Trading.
And he was doing well there.
He was simulating it. He did not make the 72 million.
He was scheduled to go on CNBC, to make an appearance and an interview and speak about his alleged success, but and then he couldn't just go, so he just
put it out there. Or maybe his mother called and said, "I gotta tell you, he's lying." Okay.
He gave an interview to the New York Observer because he can't speak with the New York Magazine now. No.
This story makes me very optimistic because I was very depressed that the 17-year-old made $72 million on his lunch break. That's not what I make.
And then the second story, I don't want to add a lot, but it involves Sharon Osbourne. An awkward moment on TV on our show, The Talk on CBS. Let's take a look.
Do we have it?
You have to wait for it.
We have that.
What am I going to do? How could I sit here through the show? I have it. Let's see how it is. No, don't show. You're right. Put it back in.
No. Oh, yes. Thank you. Morning television.
It was, it's an implant. And
clearly, yes.
Yes, and suddenly in the middle of the show, she felt that she was like, something is moving, wait. And she said, I spent a bloody fortune on this thing. It's falling out. What do I do? No, seriously, has anyone got any glue? This is, I think she'll get a free treatment after this appearance.
It took me a while to figure out what they were saying. I'm so glad I don't anchor the Kvet Show. Yes,
and now speaking of homeless people, this is a story that you both will like because a student in the UK, she got stuck after she was out in the night with her friends and she couldn't pay for the taxi. She didn't have her bank card with her. She didn't have cash money. And then a homeless person just offered to help her, and
gave
he
her
wanted
the little money he had.
£3. Yes, and then when she didn't take it, she declined the offer, And when she came back home, she started, this campaign to raise money for him. This homeless person is known as Robbie, only Robbie.
Yeah.
And she raised $33,000 for him. Yeah, she tweeted it.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're bringing us when we have, Dan, because you spent clearly a lot of time with the people you photographed, I'm sure, in there. That's not something that would happen in Israel, do you think?
It will.
It will?
Yeah, it would, because I think one of the things I discovered there, it was the generosity of those people who literally don't have much.
But whatever
but
they
will
have,
always
share.
They will always share with you. They will always invite you.
A very optimistic note. Exactly. They will share, they will give out. Maybe we need less to give more.
Sometimes even more than other people.
Than other people have.
She was so moved, so touched by his gesture.
By the gesture.
Gesture. So,
and
now,
sadly, all the time we have, I'm hearing the Oscar music in my ear. I want to thank my mother, but also tell you guys that when we get back, we are going to have the latest Sean Penn movie, now an action hero. Stick with us. First, the news. Good morning. It is still Thursday, December 18th, 2014. It's still I-24 News Morning Edition, and it's still the only place you should be to get your news and your fix of Daniel Roth of The Economy magazine, who is then going to lead into Laetitia Loreny of my magazine. Just kidding. Okay, but Daniel, yes, I know, top that one.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, Economy magazine, daily on
7:10 p.m.
We're plugging at the top. And what do you have for us today?
Today, there's a new law coming into effect in the next couple of years, but it was just pushed forward in Germany to make sure that there's much, not equal, but better representation of women on certain boards in Germany.
Okay, that's wunderbar. I already have so much to say, but let's look at the report first. Yes.
Even with the controversy, Germany's cabinet has approved a quota for the number of women on the boards of some German companies. The decision, declared late last week, means that all companies that meet the requirements must have 30% of their board made up by women. The plan was met by conservative opposition, including, for a time, from Chancellor Angela Merkel. But the numbers support the notion that there's a lack of equality. The Economist reports that women make up 43% of the workforce, but only hold 4% of managing board seats and 15% of supervisory board seats in Germany's top 200 companies. Some say that quotas have little impact, though. The Economist cites the example of Norway, where a similar policy led to a small rise from 2 to 6% in the number of women CEOs, and a number of companies delisted rather than met the quota. But the center-left ministers that proposed the legal change also spoke of a much-needed cultural shift in economic realities for women in Germany.
Interesting, because I think this is also the week where resolution or 1325 in Israel supposedly passed many years ago, of more women in, on boards in the workforce
Right.
In Germany. How much of a need is there for it? I mean, I'm sure there's a need for it all over the world, but
right.
Worldwide,
there's a clear need. In Germany, as you heard, is something like 45% of women in the workforce, 47%, and it's something like 4 or 5% representation on boards.
So 4 to 5% represent. That's ridiculous.
It's very, very low. It's clear that something is necessary. Some kind of fix is necessary. Now, you can do it the slow way, where you build it into the education system and slowly change the culture over generations.
Well, that's obviously something that should be done irrespective of anything.
Absolutely. Right, teaching equality, teaching feminism, teaching sort of that women ought to have all of the choices that men have to have.
Yeah, but if we do it that way, then 100 years from now, 2 minutes before the nuclear holocaust, there'll be equality. Okay.
So here were two center-left politicians who said, look, you know what, we don't want to wait 100 years and 2 minutes before the nuclear war,
holocaust?
But we want to put in place some quotas, and we've seen that they've worked in little bits in certain ways in other places.
Where?
It's not perfect. So, for example, in Israel, as you mentioned, Israel has a 50% quota for public boards.
Right.
It's not perfect. Of course, it's still under the number, and this has been in place for about 20 years.
Yeah.
But if you compare the public and the private sectors in Israel, publicly it's nearly half. It's nearly met the quota. Privately, there's basically no change.
No.
It's
Men,
insignificant.
Yeah.
Insignificant numbers. So when you look at a case like Israel, you see that actually changing laws absolutely does help. So in Germany, they're saying 30%. Let's have 30% representation on these particular publicly traded boards. And let's just push it forward. Now, Norway is a case that The Economist points out was a failure. They had some movement forward from 2% to 6% representation. But the real issue there was that they allowed companies to delist themselves if they didn't want to meet the quota. They could go.
How many companies released themselves?
A fair number.
A fair number. No, it's to me, and I'm sorry to say this because, and once again, you're outnumbered by the women in the studio, right? But that it has to be constituted by law to force you guys, to force men actually to put women into boards, to integrate women into, I'm not just saying the workforce, but to integrate them into the decision-making process.
Right, because actually when you look at the workforce, women are very integrated,
yes.
in the Western
They're just
world.
not running anything.
Exactly.
Almost, yes.
And when you think about culture and law, culture is sort of bottom-up change and law is top-down change.
Right.
And you need both of those, especially when you're trying to put women into the top of the power spheres in a society.
No, definitely. And the interesting bit about Germany, I have to say, a place where Angela Merkel has been reigning supreme, one can say, for several years. It's interesting that actually within the mentality of the country, that has not really sifted in yet.
Right. And, so role models are important. Angela Merkel is important.
Love Angela
Barack
Merkel.
Obama is important in America. But you can see neither of those represent that sexism or racism is over.
No, completely. Very valid point, and putting me in my place as you should, being the man that you are.
That's something they call mansplaining.
Mansplaining.
Yes.
You mansplained it.
I'm
going to mansplain it away from you. I'm going to mansplain away to the beautiful, smart Leticia Lorny. Yes, I'm slightly in love. Yes, but you actually know. That said, you have news.
Yes, I do. That's why I'm here. I actually do have sad news. If you wanted to see the movie, the controversial movie now, the most controversial movie in the world right now, ever, the interview, you won't be able to see it. Because the studio, Sony Pictures, has officially scrapped its release plans. It was supposed to come out on the Christmas Day, and it won't after the threats that we all heard of this week. The statement says, in light of the decision by the majority of our exhibitors not to show the film, the interview, we have decided not to move forward with the planned December 25th theatrical release. Yeah, they got pretty scared.
This is, first of all, I'm sorry, I can't even speak because I find this really ridiculous, and I need to do a little poll here in studio. Because you're Canadian?
I'm Canadian,
Yeah,
yes.
but you lived in the States.
Yeah.
You lived in the States. Do you think it's the North Koreans or the Americans being insane?
Who did it?
Yes, who did the hacking?
Well, the hacking was done by the North Korean, but
this came out last night. They said it wasn't, and then they said it was, and
yeah. Are we gonna go?
What's great? Like everyone is talking about this right now. Like Twitter is going. Twitter. Twitter is going crazy. Everyone is judging Americans for not really, it's not normal not to release
letting the terrorist win.
Judd Apatow was enraged. Jimmy Kimmel answered to him. He said he agrees with the rage that it's an American act of
cowardice that validates terrorist actions and sets a terrifying precedent. Is America going to war with North Korea over the interview?
Bill Maher is saying that is all it takes, an anonymous threat and the number 9/11 to throw free expression under the bus, and then he says #PussyNation. version, which is pretty harsh. Michael Moore is joking. He says, Michael Moore is saying, "Dear Sony hackers, now that you run Hollywood, I'd also like less romantic comedies, fewer Michael Bay movies, and no more Transformers." That
I'm with
made me,
Michael Moore on that.
Absolutely.
And actually, Steve Carell made a point. He just posted this picture, a picture of Charlie Chaplin, who did make a movie making fun of the dictator. It was the Nazism at the time, and the movie still came out. Everyone could see it, and there was not that much of a controversy.
You know, but Chaplin could not go to Germany. But
well, he could, but
still,
I don't think
I
don't think Seth Rogen and James Franco want to go to North Korea anyway.
Maybe James Franco.
Because he wants to be everywhere. But that's pretty sad. That's pretty sad. Even after the controversy around the Martin Scorsese, Last Temptation, the movie theaters were burning out and stuff like that.
Very, very true.
It's the first time that it actually over an anonymous kind of thread.
So that's what I'm saying. Overreaction, do we think? Maybe?
Mm-hmm. Big time.
Big time?
Or big time marketing
exactly.
movie,
That's what Judd Apatow tweeted. Yeah. One of his tweets last night was now everyone's going to see this movie. Yeah. This is going to be the most watched film of all time.
Of all times, Boondocks. No, definitely. Released online, most likely, or being hacked. Fascinating, but as you said, Twitter is abuzz. Yes, okay.
So you won't be able to see the interview on the 25th of December, but you will be able to see the new Clint Eastwood movie, which the premiere was 2 days ago. It's the story of real-life Chris Kyle, who was a U.S. Navy SEAL sniper, who was responsible for 160 kills during his career, but had a very hard time dealing with his family when he came back from Iraq, and we have a clip. Let's look at it.
Let's take a look.
I got a military-age male on a cell phone watching the convoy, over.
If you think he's reporting troop movement, you have a green light. Your call, over.
Maybe he's just calling his old lady.
Wow. Now, I gotta say, that's Bradley Cooper, right?
Yes, that's Bradley Cooper. That's also co-producing this movie that he claims not to be a political movie, even though we know that Clint Eastwood is very political, very patriotic. He says it's a patriotic film for sure. Because, there's a little bit of controversy going around there because they're basically, it's like the whole American hero against the whole evil terrorists of Iraq, and that's opening scene is pretty harsh. It's actually Bradley Cooper is making the decision of either saving a woman, its baby,
or killing the target,
or killing the target. Right. So this movie it comes on this, it
also comes on the heels of actually the CIA report, I have to say, in many ways. It comes on the heels of a lot of condemnation towards the Iraq War, towards what soldiers did there. But I'm assuming the movie then deals with the hard time he has as a soldier to come back home.
Exactly. That's why they say it's not that political. It's more of like the aspect of the character itself more than the actual.
No, but also a problem in America has a huge problem with dealing with its veterans. Case in point, Vietnam, and definitely also Iraq now and Afghanistan. So it's taking a close look at that, which I find commendable. Plus,
but it won't be screened at the Oscars.
Will not be screened at the Oscars. Will the North Koreans watch it? Is what I'm wondering. Because they're deciding what we watch. Yes.
Another beautiful release of a trailer. It's the new Terrence Malick film, and we never knew nothing about the Terrence Malick until we see the first image of the trailer. So let's take a look at
the Terrence Malick trailer. Exciting.
All those years, living the life of someone I didn't even know.
Let me tell you about you. I want to make you rich.
You see the palm trees? They tell you anything's possible.
I wish we could see hours and hours of the Terrence Malick shots.
Clearly, I think we can surmise that Leticia Lorney is a very big Terrence Malick fan.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
you think that's the conclusion we can draw from this.
Quite clear. I can surmise.
What a cast!
Yeah, amazing cast.
So who's in
Blanchett,
it?
Christian Bale, Natalie Portman. It's basically a fable of Hollywood decadence and disillusion right after David Cronenberg's take on Hollywood. This is Terrence Malick's take on Hollywood, which will probably be way more philosophical
than anything else. And not
poetic,
only that,
yeah.
at a time where, you know, we have the Cosby scandal coming out,
Yes.
Hollywood scandals on emails or whatnot. You think maybe this movie was produced by the North Koreans.
Taking us down a peg.
You can bring it all back to them. Yes.
And I'm gonna go. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna go straight to. I'm gonna go straight to what you announced. Sean Penn is no more a character actor. Now he's an action star. If you want to take a look at this,
don't you have to go to work today?
Being the
I gotta grab some stuff and get out to the site.
Director of Taken. You remember Liam Neeson was already doing his comeback. So that's Sean Penn being a badass. Casting is actually also pretty impressive with Javier Bardem, like
as a good guy.
Of course, as a bad guy. Idris Elba, Jasmine Trinka, and Ray Winstone. The story is about a sniper hitman who wants out of the game so he can settle down with his longtime love. So it's pretty much just the reverse story of the movie of Clint Eastwood.
Of course, listen, I was about to say. Yeah, the theme of today's item is Americans shoot their guns. Yes.
But I wanted, you know, it's pretty interesting. Like the whole marketing around this movie is about like this Sean Penn becoming an action star. It's something I never thought about. Like this, the comeback of this. Is it what's going to be the future of this character actors? Like Sean Penn needs that to be back on the.
I think it's a question that we can ask about Jack. No, it's not Jack Nicholson. It's actually my God, Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Robert De Niro, towards the end of his career, has started doing all these films.
Comedy. Yeah.
But also things that I find myself sometimes thinking at the theater, thinking, you're Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Do you really need to do this? You know?
When we say comedy, we say loosely. Like,
Actually, I love Taken.
Taken was great. Taken was great. And speaking of Taken,
Gunman.
I'm hearing you can't hear it, but I'm hearing the Oscar music in my ear. Again, thanking my mother. And this was it for us this morning. I-24 News Morning Edition. Check us out on the web, on Facebook, all those social networks. Everywhere. And check in tomorrow morning for another edition of the Morning Edition, the way to start your day every single day. Thank you.